Newshour Special Edition.
Welcome back. Viewers, on this special edition of the Newshour, I'm joined by Michael Rubin, a former Pentagon official and senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. He has hailed India's Operation Sindoor and has said that India has emerged victorious, both diplomatically and militarily. Thank you very much, Mr. Rubin, for joining us here on Times Now. You have described Pakistan's approach to the ceasefire as running like a scared dog with its tail between its legs. What makes you really say that?
Well, Pakistan had several opportunities to save face and to end the conflict. The fact of the matter is, Pakistan kept... Sorry, let me start over, please. 1, 2, 3. Pakistan appeared desperate for a ceasefire behind the scenes. They had provoked India, they had provoked a response, and then Pakistan went even further, leading India to strike at and take offline many of its Air Force bases. The precision, the accuracy, and the impact of India's strike panicked Pakistan, because it's clear that over the last decade, while India's military has improved, Pakistan's improvement has remained in the realm of rhetoric rather than reality.
Mr. Rubin, you further mentioned that the Pakistani military lost very, very badly. Could you elaborate on what indicators or intelligence lead you to such a definitive conclusion that India had a decisive victory, especially considering Pakistan's constant attempts to control the narrative internally?
Well, one only needs to look at the Pakistani air bases that were struck by India to see just how thoroughly India was able to neutralize and penetrate Pakistan's air defenses. And those facts speak louder than any claims from the Pakistani state. Ultimately, it appears that India acted with great restraint, because when they struck Pakistani air bases and other Pakistani military sites on the Pakistani side of the line of control, it's clear that India acted with restraint even in those attacks, and that the damage could have been much greater. That itself sent a signal to Islamabad and to Pindi that they needed to work behind the scenes to end this conflict, because nuclear blackmail or not, it was clear that Pakistan wasn't going to win this fight.
Mr. Rubin, Prime Minister Modi has said that this Operation Sindoor has just been temporarily halted and its future course of action will depend on Pakistan's behavior. Do you believe that if India had ignored Pakistan's request for a ceasefire, it could have gone on to decisively dismantle Pakistan's terror ecosystem?
Well, ultimately, it's not going to be India which dismantles Pakistan's terror infrastructure. It's going to be a recognition inside Pakistan that the Pakistanis have no choice, that they can't go down this path. I'm reminded of Anwar Sadat, the late president of Egypt. He won a Nobel Peace Prize for agreeing to end war, end terrorism, and establish relations with Israel. But what many people forget is he only agreed to make peace once he tried war and failed miserably. Ultimately, people like Asim Munir need to understand just how thoroughly they were defeated on the battlefield. What's been lacking is their conclusion that they have no choice but to end the pattern of behavior and war by proxy and terror that has governed them for the last 50 years, and instead become and evolve into a state that is at peace with not only its neighbors, but itself as well.
Okay. How decisive, in your opinion, was Prime Minister Modi's leadership in the aftermath of the terrorist attack that was the trigger for India's retaliation?
Without a doubt, Prime Minister Modi showed great leadership. But you know, Prime Minister Modi wasn't alone in this. India is a democracy, and India demonstrated the maturity of its democracy because so many of the opposition leaders saw the forest through the trees, and they put India's interests in time of crisis above their own political interests. And one of the symbols of India's strength here was just the solidarity which they showed across the political spectrum.
And what's your assessment of how the battle of narratives then played out?
The battle of narratives is as important in the aftermath as any diplomatic agreement. What Pakistan is trying to do is win through dishonesty and win through narrative, win through propaganda, what they couldn't win in reality on the battlefield. Now, there's going to be some news organizations like the BBC which are incorrigible, which put the political leanings of their own correspondents above any objective assessment of the news. There's nothing India can do about that. But what has won India plaudits and convinced many that India is speaking the truth is not the hyperbole that we've seen from Pakistan, but it's just the quiet presentation of evidence that shows that what India said was true and that India has credibility. What India must do now, however, is ensure that diplomats and foreign officials, including in Washington, D.C., do not engage in moral equivalence. There is one victim here, and it is India. There's one aggressor, and it was Pakistan. Pakistan has had its nose bloodied because India showed that it's no longer willing to be attacked by terrorists and not respond. It's redrawing the red line. But make no mistake, there is no moral equivalence. This war did not erupt spontaneously. It was the result of a deliberate decision in Pakistan to once again attack India by terrorist proxies. And more so, it was a decision by those terrorist proxies to go after innocent tourists and slaughter them in front of their families on the basis of their religion. No country, no government, no respectable democracy would ever allow this to occur to their citizenry without a response. And so what India did was not aggression, and there was no equivalence to Pakistan. What they did was no different than what the United States did when we entered Abbottabad and killed Osama bin Laden.
Why do you think Donald Trump and his administration have not explicitly called out Pakistan for its role in supporting terrorism?
Well, first of all, I think Donald Trump is acting reactively. And part of the problem, and this is analysis, not an excuse, is that his administration isn't fully staffed up. He hasn't appointed all the assistant secretaries, all the diplomats, and so forth. And so those who are manning the desks are doing so in a temporary capacity, and they're much more willing to be reactive than proactive. And frankly, the nature of President Trump and his inner circle is they don't trust the system, and therefore they don't have a strong support base. What I worry about now, especially after President Trump's visit to West Asia, is that perhaps as he's shown himself to be able to, for lack of a better word, be bribed by expensive gifts in Qatar, I would hope that Qatar, which has worked hand in hand with Turkey, and perhaps with Pakistan as well, isn't trying to sway Donald Trump away from truth and have him mute his response to Pakistani terror.
Now, Donald Trump, who had constantly claimed to be brokering peace between India and Pakistan, has taken a U-turn and has recently said, I don't want to say I did, but I sure as hell helped settle the problem. Why do you think Trump has constantly bragged about has been taking credit as far as this peace is concerned, or rather the ceasefire understanding between India and Pakistan is concerned, and now this U-turn?
It's the nature of Trump's personality to brag, and Trump will put his own self-promotion above truth. The way to approach Trump and to analyze Trump is like an impressionist painting rather than a photograph. That said, perhaps this is a sign that those around Donald Trump understand the mistakes he made. They're not willing to admit the mistakes, but they're willing to try to revise the past. And my advice would be, even though India is insulted by the way that Donald Trump threw his weight around and claimed credit falsely for a ceasefire, that we should look towards the future more. And what's important between India and the United States isn't simply the personal relationship between our elected leaders, but it's actually the interoperability and the cooperation and the trust between the systems. And perhaps we're seeing that start to shine through.
Pakistan received a $1 billion bailout from IMF, even though it hasn't made any real changes to its economic or political policies. How do you see this leniency?
Well, first of all, I think this leniency is a mistake, of course. As an advocate, I urged that this $1 billion not be given to Pakistan. Money is fungible, and it's clear that what the International Monetary Fund is doing is throwing good money after bad. It's subsidizing Pakistani terror. When you have an arsonist, the last thing you want to do is give him all the gasoline he demands. That said, I think there's also something more coming into play. Donald Trump operates often as an individual. And the problem with operating as an individual without relying upon a system is that you don't have the bandwidth in order to act proactively and take advantage of key decision points. With Secretary of State Marco Rubio now acting not only being Secretary of State, but acting as the National Security Advisor among two other positions, it's clear that perhaps there simply wasn't enough time and wasn't enough focus within the top of the White House and at the top of the State Department to prevent this from coming into play. If we had all the people staffing the desks, if we had a system that was actually operating rather than a man who was trying to operate despite the system, then I think this would have not been, this $1 billion wouldn't have been given to Pakistan. Now the issue, however, is the $1 billion was part of a $7 billion loan, which is supposed to be given $1 billion at a time.
But Mr. Rubin,
so now it's the job of India.
Right. Mr. Rubin, there are credible accounts also suggesting that one of Pakistan's nuclear sites may have been hit. What do you think the implications could be?
Well, look, I've read the same reports you have in the open source, and I have no proof to know exactly what happened, but let us say this. One of the biggest concerns in the United States historically has been the security of Pakistan's nuclear weapons. To some extent, the United States is partially responsible, since Pakistan got its nuclear start with President Eisenhower's Atoms for Peace program in the 1950s. The Pentagon does have plans to enter Pakistan and secure nuclear sites if and when Pakistan ever collapses. But if Pakistani nuclear sites were hit, likely that only happened because of a recognition that Pakistan was about to go rogue with its nuclear weapons. And that's a situation that can never be allowed to exist. The problem in Pakistan is Asim Munir doesn't necessarily have complete control. He's a hardliner. He gambled. He believed that he could win, but he was wrong. He didn't understand just how corrupt the Pakistani army was. And perhaps as he's been forced to accept a ceasefire, there are hardliners who don't want to accept that outcome. That is the nightmare situation for anyone. And that's why we all need to be on our guard, because what happens in Pakistan doesn't stay in Pakistan. It's a threat not only to India, but to the entire world. That's why we can no longer ignore Pakistan's rogue behavior.
Absolutely. Mr. Michael Rubin, thank you very much for speaking with us here on Times Now. Thank you for sharing with us your perspective. With this, we will slip into another very, very short break. More updates on the other side. Don't go away.